Hello friends, welcome back to my channel, or hello if this is your first time here. My name is Nicole and I'm Canadian, but I now live in the UK, England in specific. And I never really referred to myself as an Anglophile until this last year, and I noticed a lot of the content creators that I was watching or gravitating towards either were Anglophiles themselves or were like the epitome of what I think England to be up here. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what England or Britain is like, but I think there are certain people that have such an affinity for England and British culture. So with that, if that sounds like your cup of tea, I would be so honored if you joined me on this series all about being an Anglophile. So we've spoken about some of the words that I've had to get used to since moving here. We have spoken about some of the culture shocks I've had to get used to since moving here. And now today we are going to talk about more culture shocks moving from Canada to England. Now, if you're American and you're watching this, some of these culture shocks may be the same for you. I find I have a kindred spirit feeling between me and a lot of Americans that are over here, not just me and other Canadians. So with that, let's talk about some more culture shocks. So one of the things I think that I wasn't prepared for when I moved over here was to feel as cold as I do on a daily basis. Where I come from in Canada is a place called Edmonton, Alberta, and it, no word of a lie, gets like -40 there in the winter. But it's cold, but I never feel this inside freezing, damp coldness. I just don't feel it. Whereas here in the UK, I'll look at the temperature and I'm like, surely it is like under 0 degrees, and it will be like +11. And I'm like, how is it this cold here? I think it's because the houses are made out of bricks, number one. Number two, they have radiators and they don't have furnaces, and radiators, believe it or not, don't radiate. And so it takes a lot longer for a house to warm up. And I also just think the dampness in the air, it is an island essentially, and we're not that far from the sea, and so I think just the damp air just makes it a lot colder feeling. Maybe if you are on the east coast of Canada or the States, you understand that damp feeling, and I know you deal with the -30s and the -40s sometimes yourself, but I just didn't anticipate it to feel as cold as it is here, especially when you can see flowers growing all year round, but you feel so cold. Now, I spoke about this in another video, but I do think I have to mention it here again, and that is queuing. British people love to queue, and I don't think it's a matter of North Americans are rude. Well, Canadians, I would say, aren't rude and like bust in the line ahead of people, but British people do it to a point where it is so overly polite and formal, it loses sense. So that has been a huge culture shock to get used to. Now, the next thing that I've had to get used to is a lot of words here don't sound the way that they're spelt. And so I feel like every language will have this, but for example, I feel like in England, it is the most and the worst. So we live in a city called Bristol, and there is a word that you see often here. I think it's based on, I don't even know what it is, so I'm gonna just stop right there. But it's the word Q-U-A-Y. Now, if you are anybody else anywhere in the world, you would say that word quay. Not here in England. You say this word key, like a key. Whereas, you know, most people would say that that is very easily quay. Now, I feel like another word or ending of word that tends to confuse a lot of North Americans is when a word has S-H-I-R-E at the end of it. So there's this one place that I feel like most people can't say, or it's a type of sauce. I was gonna say it, but I was just gonna bumble over my word. Worcester sauce? Worcestershire. I can normally say it. This is so annoying because I can normally say it. Let's move on to maybe a different word that I know I can say. Like Shropshire, Devonshire, Gloucestershire. So anytime you hear or you see the word with the S-H-I-R-E on the end, that is shire, not shire. So if you are coming over to the UK and you don't want to seem like a tourist, maybe you want to pass as a student that is living here now, or someone who has immigrated and you're now an expat here now, learn to say these words properly. However, there is one place, I can't think of it on the top of my head, but it's around here, that it is spelled S-H-I-R-E at the end, but it's not shire at the end, it's actually shire. So sometimes you just don't know. Okay, so this is probably the biggest, out of my list of things, this is probably the biggest culture shock that you would have to get your head around if you were moving here. And again, if you're British watching this, please confirm or deny. Or maybe you didn't even notice this about you. But British people, they won't, do you want to come up? Come on. Okay, so British people, they won't suggest something to you point blank. They will give you feedback as if it's a suggestion. So what do I mean by that? So instead of, if I painted this wall and say I didn't paint it properly, say I used a brush and there was like chunks of paint in it, they wouldn't say, hey Nicole, next time when you're going to paint, you might want to make sure that there's no dust in the paint tray before you paint, because that's what has left all these lumps and bumps in the wall. They would never say it like that. I don't think that that was rude. Like what I just said, please comment below if you think the way that I phrased that was rude. Or do you think it was just direct? For me, I love when people give me direct, to the point, ways that I can get better, and everybody that I know at home would be the same. Whereas if you were here in England, this is how they would say it to you. And maybe other parts of the UK, but I'm only going to speak for England. They would say it like, perhaps we could get a different tray, and we could, maybe before we paint, we'll swirl it out with a solution, maybe just water will work, and then we'll make sure, maybe we'll wash the walls first so there's nothing on the walls. Do you think that that would work? It's just a suggestion, but shall we try that? That's how they would give you feedback of something that they want you to change. So it's taken me quite a long time to speak British and understand that wasn't a suggestion. They were telling you that. Does that make sense? I mean, it might not make sense, but do you hear what I'm saying? And again, if you're British, please confirm or deny in the comments. Okay, so the next thing that I want to talk about that was a huge culture shock here, I understood that British people like soccer, but I didn't think that it would be to this extent. I went to a wedding in summer, like a wedding reception, and it was the second last game in the World Cup, I think, and no word of a lie, there was a TV at this wedding reception. To the point, I was so embarrassed. Paul wanted to cancel going to this wedding reception because the soccer game was on. I was floored. I was absolutely floored at that behavior. I was like, we can't let people down like that. And then we got to the wedding and they all were watching the soccer, and the bride, she was American, and she was like, well, I guess this is my wedding day. And I felt so bad for her because coming from someone who doesn't understand this culture, I was like, I would cry if that was my wedding day, but that's just the culture over here. Now, the next culture shock that you might have, again, I don't know if this is like a all of the UK thing. I would imagine that it is, but when you're driving, I think it's because like the roads are so narrow, sometimes you have to pull in and let the oncoming car go by, and then you'll go back out into the road. But everyone, they'll wave and thumbs up. Wave, thumbs up. If you're crossing a street and the person lets you go, because up until like I think this week, pedestrians don't have, well, they didn't have the right of way. That's something that has just changed here. If you're crossing a crosswalk, it's the signal that makes me like laugh, is that it's a like, thank you, you're good to go. Thank you, you're good to go. And again, I don't know if this is like a all of the UK thing or if it's just like a Bristol thing or England thing, but now the next thing that is going to be a little bit of a culture shock here, especially if you are Canadian or American. I feel like Canadians and Americans, they're more so huggers. I am not a hugger, so this wasn't a huge adjustment for me, but the thing that they do here is still an adjustment for me. I find people, they'll often give you a kiss on the cheek here. We just went over to one of my friends for dinner last week, and the man of the house, like, I gave him a hug and like he kissed me on the cheek. And I think French people do both cheeks. He just gave me a kiss on one cheek, and I'm like, in North America, we just hug. So it does catch me off guard a little bit when they kiss on the cheek here. And it's not even a kiss. It's not a proper kiss. It's like a cheek to cheek. So that's something that you might have to wrap your head around. The next thing that you're gonna have to wrap your head around is if there is a package that comes or a parcel, which my words have changed. I've just said package to you, whereas I often say parcel. If you're not home, it will go to your neighbor. And I find that, like, I would just rather have it go to the post office. The rare time it goes to the post office, but most of the time it will go to one of your neighbors. And sometimes I feel bad for the neighbors because I get a lot of packages, and I feel bad that they're constantly having to take my stuff in. That's another thing that I find a little bit different. I just had to request some images from my doctor in Canada, and they won't release these images by sending them digitally. So they won't fax it internationally. They won't send it by email. But then equally, they're saying their only option to send it is to send it via mail. And I was like, but you don't understand here, my mail can go to my neighbor very easily. So they were like, yeah, but you know, opening someone else's mail is a federal offense. And I get that, but it just doesn't make sense. But anyways, not what we came here to talk about. But speaking of doctors, that was a perfect segue, and I didn't know I was going there. They don't do annual health checkups here. It's every 2 years, believe it or not. Now, I don't know about you, but every 2 years, a lot can happen with the body in 2 years. So I find it quite crazy that they don't do an annual checkup. But what they do an annual checkup for, which brings me into my last point, is you have to do an annual MOT, which is for your car. So every year your car has to get looked over and certified that it is roadworthy. I think that that's a great thing, to be honest with you, but let's just stop and think about this for a second. I need to have a yearly checkup for my car to make sure that it's safe to be on the road, but my body, that can be a life or death thing, you only need to do that every 2 years. It's crazy. One makes money, one does not. On that very down and conspiracy ending, I hope you enjoyed this video. Are you living here in the UK? Do you find some of these things a little bit culture shock as well? I would love to hear if you have felt like that too, or maybe it's just me. Anyways, my friends, thank you so much for watching. If you made it to this end of the video, let me know in the comments. If you've been watching the rest of the videos on this Anglophile series, let me know which one's been your favorite. Thanks for watching. See you.